The rails cut through the prairie like a scar, stretching for miles in both directions, steel lines glinting under a pale, late summer sun. The land around them was wide and dry, dotted with sagebrush and the occasional cottonwood clinging stubbornly to the soil. This was no place for anyone to be left behind, not in the heat of day, not with the rattlesnakes coiled in the shadows, and certainly not alone. By the time the train thundered past, smoke pouring from its blackened stack, she was already there. A young woman, no more than 22, lay crumpled in the weeds beside the tracks. Her dress was torn in places, streaked with dirt and blood. Bruises marked her arms where rough hands had held her too tightly. Dust clung to her lips, and her breathing was shallow, as though each gasp cost her more than she could give. The train didn't slow. Its iron wheels screamed as they struck the rails, the echo of its passing carrying out across the land. No one on board looked down. No one leaned out to see. But one man did notice. Wade Callahan had been riding the prairie since sunup, his horse restless under the weight of a long, thirsty trail. He wasn't a lawman, wasn't a preacher, and sure as hell wasn't anyone's savior. Just a cowboy drifting from one town to the next, living on day wages and worn-out saddles. But when he caught sight of her, still small and broken at the edge of the tracks, something in him tightened like a rope pulled taut. He pulled up hard, dust swirling as his horse stamped and snorted. "Lord Almighty," Wade muttered under his breath. He swung down from the saddle, boots crunching against gravel, spurs jangling faintly. At first he thought she was gone. Her eyes were closed, her skin pale, her lips cracked and dry. But when he knelt beside her, brushing the hair from her face, her lashes flickered. A faint sound left her throat. A whisper, barely shaped into words. "Don't leave me." Her voice broke like glass in the wind. Wade's jaw tightened. Whoever had left her here hadn't cared whether she lived or died. But he wasn't about to ride on and pretend he hadn't seen. Not with those bruises. Not with the pleading in her voice. He slid an arm carefully beneath her shoulders. She winced, her breath catching in pain, but didn't pull away. "You're safe now, miss," he told her softly, the words carrying more weight than he expected. "Ain't no train gonna run you down. Not while I'm here." The horizon stretched wide around them, silent except for the groan of iron wheels vanishing in the distance. Wade adjusted his grip, steadying her as she tried to lift her head, but the truth was clear. She couldn't walk. She couldn't even stand. And the nearest town was half a day's ride, across land that didn't forgive the weak. So Wade made the choice then and there, the kind a man didn't take back once it was made. He would carry her, however far it took, however heavy the weight, because no one deserved to be left beside the tracks like freight that had fallen loose. And because something in him, something he hadn't felt in years, told him this girl's story wasn't finished yet. Wade adjusted her carefully against his chest, mindful of every bruise, every ragged breath. She weighed little, less than a sack of grain maybe, but the limp heaviness of her body made it feel as though he was carrying the whole world. His horse shifted uneasily beside them, sensing the change, ears twitching at the silence left by the train's passing. The woman stirred faintly, her lips moving as though shaping a prayer, though no words came out. Her eyes fluttered open for just a moment, hazel, soft even through the fog of pain, before they slipped closed again. "Stay with me, darling," Wade muttered. His voice was low, steady, the way you'd speak to a frightened colt. "Don't you go quitting on me." He lifted her into the saddle, mounting behind her to hold her upright. His arm wrapped gently around her waist, steadying her so the horse's gait wouldn't jar her too hard. She leaned against him, head resting against his chest, and Wade felt her shallow breaths against his shirt. The sun beat down hard as they rode away from the tracks. The rails gleamed like fire behind them, stretching into nowhere. Wade didn't look back. The prairie spread wide before them, open, lonely, and merciless. Sagebrush rolled by in patches, dust kicking up around the horses' hooves. Overhead, hawks circled lazily, their cries sharp against the endless blue sky. There wasn't a drop of shade until the cottonwoods by the creek miles ahead, and Wade knew they'd never make it to town in the girl's condition without stopping first. "Who did this to you?" he asked quietly, not expecting an answer. For a while there was only the rhythm of hooves and the rasp of the wind. Then, faint as a sigh, she whispered, "Men, 3 of them." Her throat worked as if the words cut her from the inside out. "Said, I had nothing worth taking, so they left me." Her voice cracked on the last word, the weight of it hanging between them like a shadow. Wade's grip on the reins tightened until the leather bit into his palm. He'd seen cruelty before, men who thought power gave them permission, but leaving her by the tracks was something worse. It was mockery. "Reckon they were wrong about you," Wade said after a long silence, his voice gravel low. "You got something worth keeping alive." Her lashes fluttered, but she didn't answer. She drifted back into a shallow, uneasy sleep. By the time they reached the cottonwoods, Wade's shirt was damp with sweat, the horse's sides slick with lather. He slid down carefully, cradling her as though she were made of glass, and carried her to the shade. The creek gurgled quietly nearby, its water clear and cool, a ribbon of life cutting through the dryness. Wade soaked his bandana and pressed it gently again, kissed her lips. She drank in small, trembling sips, each one a battle, but colour touched her cheeks for the first time since he'd found her. "There you go," he murmured, crouched beside her. "Slow and steady. Don't you worry. We'll make it." When she opened her eyes again, they lingered on his face, studying him as though trying to decide whether to trust him. Her voice was little more than a rasp when she spoke. "Why? Are you helping me?" Wade sat back on his heels, his hand tightening around the damp bandana. He could have said because it was right, because no one deserved to be left like a dog in the dirt. But the truth was heavier, more complicated, and it caught in his throat. "Because I couldn't ride past," he said finally, "not when I saw you there." She blinked slowly, and for the first time something flickered in her expression. A fragile thread of relief, almost disbelief, as though she'd never expected kindness again. The creek bubbled, the cottonwoods whispered in the wind, and Wade knew this was only the start. Whoever those men were, they'd left her for dead, which meant if they found out she was alive, they might come looking. And he'd be ready. The sun sagged low, painting the sky in streaks of blood orange and dust. Wade kept the fire small beneath the cottonwoods, careful not to let the smoke climb too high. He wasn't afraid of the dark. He was afraid of what might be moving in it. The woman lay curled on a blanket, her breathing shallow but steadier than before. He'd cleaned her wounds as best he could with water from the creek and a strip of linen torn from his own shirt. Every bruise told a story he didn't want to imagine. She stirred when the fire popped. Her eyes flickered open, catching the faint light. For a long moment she only stared at him, like she wasn't sure if he was real. "You could have left me," she said softly, her voice hoarse, raw. Wade met her gaze across the flames. "And you could have died." Her lips trembled, not with fear this time, but with something smaller, harder to name. She turned her face to the fire, shadows, tracing the hollows of her cheeks. A coyote's cry split the night. The horse lifted its head, ears twitching toward the sound. Wade's hand went automatically to the rifle at his side. Coyotes didn't worry him. Men did. He rose and paced the edge of the cottonwood stand, eyes narrowed to the prairie's vast dark. Out there, the tracks ran like a knife through the land. If those 3 men had come this way once, there was nothing to keep them from circling back. He had a feeling men like that didn't like loose ends. When he returned to the fire, the woman was sitting up, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. She looked small, smaller than she should have been. "They'll come back," she whispered, as if reading the thought straight out of his head. "Men like that don't leave nothing behind, not unless they're sure it won't rise again." Wade crouched in front of her, steadying her trembling hands with his own. His voice was calm, but there was iron underneath. "Then let 'em come. You're not alone this time." Her eyes glistened in the firelight, but she didn't look away. "Why are you risking yourself for me?" He hesitated. because he'd seen too many left behind, because he couldn't stand the thought of one more life thrown away like scrap. But he didn't say that. Not yet. Instead, he squeezed her hands once and let go. Reckon a man's got to draw a line somewhere. Mine's here. The night deepened. The fire burned low. Just as Wade was about to settle, the horse snorted, ears pinned, muscles taut. Wade froze. Out past the cottonwoods, faint but clear, came the distant crunch of boots on gravel. He reached for the rifle. The woman's breath hitched sharply, her entire body stiffening as though she'd already heard those footsteps before in nightmares. "They found us," she whispered. Wade rose slowly, his shadow stretching long in the firelight. His jaw tightened, his voice quiet as a promise. "Then they'll wish they hadn't." The fire hissed low, spitting sparks into the cold night. Wade kept still, rifle leveled, listening. The crunch of boots came again, closer this time, deliberate. Whoever was out there wasn't stumbling by chance. The woman pressed herself against the blanket, her fingers clenching the fabric until her knuckles went white. She didn't cry out, but her wide eyes told Wade everything. She knew those steps, the weight of them, the rhythm of men who had already carved their cruelty into her. "Stay low," Wade murmured without looking back. His voice carried the weight of a man who'd already chosen what came next. The footsteps stopped. Silence spread heavy across the prairie. Then, a voice, slick with mockery, drifted through the trees. "Well, hell, look what we got here. Ain't that our little bird? Thought she'd be dead by now." The woman flinched. Wade's grip on the rifle tightened, though he stayed where he was, eyes scanning the dark. Another voice joined in, rougher, meaner. "And some fool cowboy sitting her fire. Guess we got two to bury tonight." The third man laughed, low and ugly, the kind of laugh that promised pain. They stepped into view at last. Three shadows against the starlight, their boots grinding on the gravel, their coats heavy with dust. One carried a pistol, another a knife, the third just his fists, as if that was all he ever needed. Wade's voice cut through the night, calm as steel drawn slow from its sheath. "You boys made a mistake leaving her alive." The man with the pistol sneered. "And you made a bigger one taking her in. Don't worry, cowboy. Won't take long to fix both." The woman whispered, barely audible. "Don't fight them. You'll die." Wade's jaw set. He didn't take his eyes off the men, but his words reached her clear. "I've been dying a little every day, seeing the world. Turn its back. Not tonight." The first shot cracked, sharp and violent. It whistled past Wade's ear, shattering bark from a cottonwood trunk. In the same heartbeat, Wade's rifle boomed. One shot, clean and certain. The man with the pistol staggered back, clutching his arm as the weapon clattered into the dirt. The other two charged. Wade swung the rifle like a staff, catching the knife man across the jaw with a crack of bone. The last brute barreled into him, fists flying, and both men went tumbling into the dust. The woman scrambled to her knees, panic tearing at her chest. She wanted to run, but her legs refused. She wanted to scream, but her throat burned shut. All she could do was clutch the edge of the blanket and pray Wade's strength didn't give out. The fight was brutal. The big man's fists were like sledgehammers, each one rattling Wade's ribs. But Wade fought with something deeper than muscle. He fought with the weight of every scar, every grave, every soul left behind because no one had stood their ground. He headbutted the brute, wrestled him into the dirt, and shoved him back with a strength that didn't come from his arms alone. As the man lunged again, Wade swung the rifle stock hard into his chest. The thug wheezed, collapsed, and stayed down. The knife man, blood trailing from his jaw, staggered upright. His blade flashed once more in the firelight, but Wade was already moving. He caught the man's wrist, twisted until the knife clanged free, and sent him sprawling with a single crushing blow. Silence returned. Only the crackle of the fire and the woman's uneven breathing filled the night. Wade stood over the three men, chest heaving, blood dripping from his split lip. He wiped it with the back of his hand and finally lowered the rifle. Behind him the woman's voice quavered, torn between awe and disbelief. You fought them off." Wade turned, his gaze steady, his words quiet but edged with finality. No, I ended it. The woman's shoulders sagged as if years of fear had been carved away in that moment. She drew the blanket tighter round herself, not from cold, but from the weight of safety she hadn't known in so long. Wade crossed back to her, slow, careful, as if afraid she might break again under his touch. He offered her his hand, not rough, not forceful, but steady. She stared at it for a long moment, then placed her bruised fingers in his. And for the first time since the train tracks, she let herself breathe. The fire burned low, embers glowing like old stars scattered in the dust. Wade sat with his back to a log, the rifle across his knees, though his eyes were on the woman. She was wrapped in his blanket still, knees drawn to her chest, staring into the glow. Her hair hung loose, tangled from the fight, her face marked with shadows and bruises. Yet in the flicker of firelight, Wade thought he saw something new, something not broken but rising. For a long while neither spoke. The prairie was quiet again, the night holding its breath. At last she whispered, almost as if testing whether her own voice was allowed. "Why did you stay? Why fight for me?" Wade's eyes lowered, his words heavy, measured. "Too many times I turned away, too many graves because I told myself it wasn't my fight. When I saw you there by the tracks, I knew if I left, I'd never be any kind of man again." Her lips trembled, though not from fear. She looked at him then, truly looked, as if searching for cracks in the armor he carried. "You don't even know my name." Wade tilted his head, the faintest trace of something like a smile ghosting across his battered face. "Don't need it to know you're worth saving, but if you want to give it, I'll carry it." Her voice caught. "Clara." Wade nodded, as if the name was a vow, something to etch into his bones. "Clara," he repeated softly, letting it settle between them. Morning came slow, with pale light stretching across the prairie. The three men lay bound with their belts and ropes, groaning in the dirt. Wade had tied them tight, not out of mercy, but out of a promise that they wouldn't hurt anyone again. He saddled his horse, then lifted Clara gently, careful of her bruises, the way her hands still shook when she tried to stand. She let him, leaning against his chest, as he settled her onto the saddle. The train tracks stretched behind them like a scar across the land. Ahead, the plains rolled wide and empty, touched with gold by the rising sun. "You got somewhere to go?" Wade asked, his voice low. Clara's silence lingered, heavy with the truth of someone who had nowhere left. Finally she whispered, "No." Wade gave a single nod. "Then you ride with me, past the tracks, past all this." Her eyes lifted, meeting his, and for the first time since the night began, there was no fear in them, only the faintest spark of something fragile, but alive. As the horse carried them forward, Clara leaned her head against Wade's shoulder. He held the reins steady, but his other arm tightened around her, not just to keep her from falling, but to promise she would never be left alone by the tracks again. Behind them, the fire died to ash. Ahead, the horizon stretched wide, waiting. And though neither spoke of it, both knew that something had begun that night. Something worth carrying, past the last train, past the scars, past the silence of all that had been taken. That closes the arc. The violence is behind them. Clara has a name and voice again, and Wade chooses to carry her forward into something new. The sun had climbed higher by noon, warming the prairie grasses and turning the horizon into a shimmer. Wade rode steady, Clara still in front of him, her body tucked close as if she feared the earth itself might reach out and pull her back. Every so often she'd stir, her eyes half opening. She was weak still, but not silent anymore. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice raw. Wade glanced toward the west, toward the line of blue hills in the distance. "There's a ranch out yonder, belongs to a family I trust. You'll be safe there, till you decide what's next." Clara lowered her head again, chewing at her lip. And you? Wade's jaw tightened. He hadn't thought much beyond getting her away from the tracks, but the question sat heavy now. He cleared his throat. I'll stay close. Don't reckon I'm much good at leaving folk behind anymore. That afternoon they stopped by a creek where the water ran cold and clear. Wade lifted her down from the saddle, careful, his big hands steady against her arms. She winced as her feet touched earth, but she didn't let go of him, not right away. She crouched by the bank, cupping water in her palms, staring at her reflection in the ripples. The bruises looked harsher in daylight. For a moment, shame pulled at her shoulders. But when Wade knelt beside her, his shadow falling over hers, the shame eased. You're not what they tried to do to you, Wade said quietly, as if reading the storm in her eyes. You hear me? You're more than their cruelty. Her throat tightened, and she blinked fast against the sting in her eyes. No one's ever said that to me. Wade only shrugged, but his hand brushed her shoulder, light but certain. As night fell again, they made camp in a hollow sheltered by cottonwoods. Wade built another fire, small but steady, the smoke curling up into the stars. Clara sat wrapped in his blanket again, but this time she wasn't hunched in silence. She watched him work, her eyes following the sure, patient movements of a man who had spent too many nights alone. Why do you travel by yourself? She asked softly. Wade paused, poking at the fire. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of flames. Then he said, Because I never thought anyone would want to travel with me. Clara's gaze didn't waver. Her voice shook, but not from fear. Maybe you were wrong. That night, she didn't sleep as far away from him as before. Instead, she drew her blanket closer to where he rested. Close enough that when the coyotes howled in the distance, she felt his presence beside her like a wall no storm could break through. Wade didn't move, didn't speak, but he knew. He felt the weight of her trust settling on him like a second heartbeat, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man passing through shadows. He felt needed. The next morning broke wide and clear, the sky a pale canvas brushed with rose. Wade saddled his horse while Clara lingered by the creek, her reflection wavering in the water. She looked different than the day before, less like someone broken, more like someone holding on. When she climbed back onto the horse, her movements were steadier. She still leaned against Wade, but not from weakness alone. Now it was trust. They rode west through the rolling country, the prairie giving way to stands of oak and cedar. By midday, a valley spread open below them, dotted with fences, and a low ranch house crouched near a stand of cottonwoods. Smoke curled from its chimney, and cattle grazed in the distance. That's the place, Wade murmured. Folks here don't ask many questions. They'll give you a bed, a meal, and kindness enough to heal. Clara's hand tightened on the saddle horn. Her voice was hushed. And you? He swallowed. I'll stay round a while, but ranch work and company, they suit some better than me. They reached the yard by late afternoon. A woman in a plain dress came out onto the porch, her apron streaked with flour, her eyes sharp but kind. Beside her, a man with a weathered face and broad shoulders leaned against a post. Wade, the woman said, smiling as though she hadn't seen him in years. Well, I'll be. Thought you'd gone ghost. Almost did, Wade replied. He dismounted and helped Clara down, keeping one steadying arm around her. This here's Clara. She's had a hard go. The woman's eyes softened at once, sweeping over Clara's bruises, the way her hands trembled. Without another word, she stepped down and gathered the girl into her arm, as warm as a hearth fire. Clara stiffened at first, but slowly let herself sink into it. You'll be safe here, child, the woman whispered. Safe and wanted. That night, Clara slept in a real bed for the first time in longer than she could remember. The window was open to let the summer air drift in, and the smell of fresh bread lingered from the kitchen below. But Wade didn't take a bed. He sat out on the porch, his long legs stretched, hat tipped low as he smoked a thin roll of tobacco. The stars stretched endless above him, as they always had. And yet, something was different. He wasn't just passing through. Inside, a girl slept who trusted him with her life, a girl who might in time trust him with her heart. Toward dawn, Clara stirred awake. The house was still, but she padded quietly downstairs. She found Wade on the porch, hat tipped back, eyes closed as if he hadn't slept at all. She stepped closer, the floorboards creaking. "You should come inside," she whispered. "It's cold." He opened his eyes, met hers in the dim silver of first light. He almost said no, almost claimed he belonged out here. But the way she was looking at him, gentle, steady, asking, made something shift in him. He rose, slow, and followed her inside. That morning, the train whistle carried faintly across the land, a reminder of what had been left behind. But Wade and Clara didn't look back toward the tracks, not anymore. They had stepped beyond them, into something new, something that, for the first time in both their lives, felt like it just might last.